The Roman Empire conquered most of Europe, from the Mediterranean all the way up to Hadrian's Wall in the north of Britain. However, there was one exception to this, and that's Ireland. To Roman writers, it lay at the edge of the known world, cold, remote, beyond the limits of civilization as they understood it. They called Ireland Hibernia, the land of eternal winter. And yet Ireland wasn't unknown to the Romans. By the 1st century AD, they had conquered most of England and Wales. Roman ships sailed up and down the Irish Sea. Ireland was close, visible, and known to them. So why did they not launch an invasion? The usual explanations don't stand up. Some say Ireland was too poor, but the Romans conquered lots of poorer regions in Europe. Others say Ireland was too dangerous, but the Romans defeated far greater enemies in Germany and Asia. So it wasn't fear, and it certainly wasn't ignorance. Indeed, there was a moment in the 70s AD when the Romans seriously contemplated an invasion of Ireland. And to understand that moment, and why the invasion didn't happen, I spoke to the archaeologist Jacqueline Cahill-Wilson. And she tells a very different story, one that upends previous understandings of Ireland's relationship with the Roman Empire. Now, to see how close Ireland came to a Roman invasion, we need to return nearly 2,000 years to the 70s AD. The Romans had conquered most of England and Wales by this point. Jacqueline now explains how the Roman general leading this campaign, a man called Agricola, had an exiled Irish prince with him and may have been hoping to use him in an invasion of Ireland.
Tacitus tells us that he had in his company an Irish prince or king, a Regulus, who he had kept and befriended because he thought he would be useful to him.
Alongside that prince, the Romans did have all the logistical requirements needed for an Irish invasion. They had built an enormous fortress at Chester in the northwest of England, looking onto the Irish Sea, and they'd also brought up the Roman fleet.
He set up this ridiculously large legionary fortress at Chester, Diva Victrix, and he pulled up the Roman fleet, the Classis Britannicus.
Now, a full-scale invasion didn't take place. However, when I asked Jacqueline about what may have transpired at that pivotal moment in our history, she had an intriguing answer. She suggests that maybe the Romans launched a reconnaissance mission to Ireland to get a sense of the island and its people.
And it is entirely possible that he sent a reconnaissance party over to Ireland to just check out the local rulers and find out how sophisticated they were and whether or not they could negotiate with them at that time. That's highly likely, I think.
Now, if that reconnaissance mission did take place, we know it didn't lead to an invasion, but it may have opened the door to something else. Because the archaeological picture gets far more interesting from here. When Jacqueline outlined the evidence of Roman contact with Ireland, it was far from an absence of evidence. Indeed, it suggests a very different type of relationship between the Roman Empire and Ireland.
We have some extraordinary evidence from sites that are well inland, well away from the coastal areas. So we're not talking about occasional trade here. I think what we're talking about is really quite well-established routes, well into the interior of Ireland.
Now, Roman objects don't mean there were Roman people in Ireland. Goods can move through trade without people coming with them. But Jacqueline didn't limit her investigations to objects alone. Using isotope analysis, she analysed human remains from this period, and some of her findings were truly groundbreaking.
And then when we did the isotope analysis, a lot of them turned out to be from, most likely, Roman Britain. So you have people who have originated in the Roman world.
This suggests that people with origins in the Roman Empire were physically present in Ireland. But we shouldn't assume these people were soldiers. The artefacts that they've left behind paints a very different picture. For example, in Kilkenny, an inland county far from the coast, surprising Roman finds have turned up. At Freestone Hill in the county, evidence suggests there may have been a Roman temple there.
So there seems to be a structure on the top of Freestone Hill, which, for all intents and purposes, looks like it's some sort of temple site, judging by what's deposited in there compared to these kind of sites in the proper Roman world, say Roman Britain.
Now that's intriguing. But alongside that temple, there's lots of other evidence. For example, also in County Kilkenny at Knocktofer, a Roman burial has been discovered.
In Stonyford in County Kilkenny in the 1850s, they found under plough a Roman glass cremation vessel that contained a cremation, and it was sealed. So this is someone who's been buried in a Roman tradition by people who must have known how to bury someone in a Roman tradition. So clearly there was a community there who were living in a Roman style or who were from the Roman world.
This is no longer a few isolated random trade goods, but clearly what we're talking about now is Roman communities in Ireland. Indeed, the most famous of these is at a place called Drogheda in North County Dublin. That's a headland that juts out into the Irish Sea and points across to Roman Britain. But archaeologists have discovered huge amounts of Roman artefacts at that site. Now, we will come back to Drogheda later in the video, but before we get into that, I want to look at the why question. Why were these people from the Roman Empire coming to Ireland, a place they called Hibernia, the land of winter? Jacqueline has developed an insight by mapping Roman finds across Ireland, and the picture she developed was striking. They tend to align with areas rich in resources.
And when I started plotting the Roman material in spots, in centres around Ireland, there was an interesting correlation between precious metals and access to precious metals. And also, things like the heartland of, say, good agriculture. So it's very likely that we know Kilkenny is a source of silver, and copper. There's a copper mine right at Lochshinny, right beside the trading port of Drogheda.
Now, this theory that the Romans were coming to Ireland for resources also explains why Roman artefacts have turned up in the far northwest in places like Donegal, because in Donegal there was something the Romans highly valued, and that was quartz.
And very, very high quality quartz was needed to make clear, transparent glass.
Suddenly the picture shifts dramatically. We're not talking about isolated or accidental finds. This is a clearly economically driven interaction between the Roman Empire and Ireland. And that site that I mentioned earlier in North County Dublin, at Drogheda, where huge amounts of Roman finds have been discovered, may have been a central hub for all this contact between Ireland and the Roman Empire.
And who's to say that those who are extracting metal, further down the country, exploiting sites like the silver in Kilkenny, that they are not sending all their goods through Drogheda and it's being reworked and remade and reshaped in this craft working centre on the site itself and then being shipped out and exported to the rest of the Roman world.
This all changes how we see the Roman Empire. We often think of the words attributed to Julius Caesar, veni, vidi, vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, as embodying Roman policy, but clearly in Ireland there was something very different at work. They could get what they wanted from Ireland without an invasion. And indeed, Jacqueline explained how the Romans could indeed be very pragmatic. They wouldn't risk Roman lives if they didn't have to.
For Rome, if they could not put Roman citizens' lives in danger in battle or warfare, they chose not to. And that's why they always pushed the poor auxiliary troops out front in terms of the battle and kept the legionaries behind, because it was about not sacrificing Roman citizens' lives if they could avoid it.
There's no question a full-scale Roman invasion of Ireland would have been very difficult. They would have had very long supply lines. The terrain in Ireland is immensely difficult for armies. Indeed, 1,000 years later, the Normans would encounter major difficulties when they tried to conquer Ireland. But Rome may have been able to get what it wanted from Ireland by other means, through trade and negotiation. But what about the Irish involved in this process? These are small Roman communities existing in Ireland, surrounded by much larger native populations. So why did the native Irish tolerate them? It comes back to a pretty basic idea. There was profit to be made.
Bottom line, you could get very wealthy, very rich, trading with the Roman world and giving access to material that hadn't been available before.
And if we ask then, why didn't the Romans invade Ireland? Well, simply put, they didn't need to. An invasion would have been very costly and bloody, and they could get what they wanted from Ireland through negotiation and trade. Now, I'd genuinely love to hear what you think of all this, so please do drop a comment below. If you want to hear more, I have a full hour-long podcast with Jacqueline linked beneath this episode and in the pinned comment. And finally, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please do hit that subscribe button. There's lots of great content to watch. I'd recommend checking out this video here that looks at why the Irish didn't eat fish during the Great Hunger. I'll be back next week with a brand new video. Until then, Slán.